the month, or the month. It's your choice. You're probably thinking that I just mispronounced that. No, it was pronounced that way on purpose. There are two different Hebrew words in play when dealing with any calendar discussion concerning the month. In this section, these two words will get the same workout that the Tekufa received in the previous chapter, giving you a clear discernment of the count of Yahweh's year so you can meet him for his feasts. Over time, these two words have been collapsed to mean the same thing, when in reality, they are two different nouns, with two completely different jobs and definitions. The two words we will be dealing with are Yiriach, H 3394, and Chodesh, H 2320. Yiriach doesn't show up until Genesis 37:9. Now keep in mind the rule of first mention. Yahweh's month Chodesh. We will start with the word Chodesh, H 2320, month, since it shows up first in Genesis 7:11 and 8:4. What do we find out about this word Chodesh in Genesis? Well, at first, we notice that we are dealing with a noun that is depicting a repeating 30-day count. This count is over the course of a 5-month period as defined during the flood account. Genesis 7:11. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, Chodesh, the 17th day of the month, Chodesh, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. Genesis 8:3-4. And the waters returned from off the earth continually, and after the end of the 150 days, the water was abated. And the ark rested in the 7th month, Chodesh, on the 17th day of the month, Chodesh, upon the mountains of Ararat. In the past, some have argued this does not prove there was a 150 days between the two dates given. However, Jubilees did this simple math for us. Jubilees 5:27. And the waters prevailed on the face of the earth 5 months, 150 days. What was established in the beginning and later collapsed into month, Chodesh, is the 30-day count that is 1 part of 12. These repeatable segments divide the year equally, and unsurprisingly, this count fits perfectly in the 360-day count year. The number 12 is seen all throughout the scriptures. There's 12 years, 12 princes, 12 brethren, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 wells, 12 pillars, from the chiefs and captains in 1 Chronicles to the tree of life in Revelation and its 12 fruits. There are 12s literally everywhere. In fact, searching the King James, my sword stops at 100 entries for 12. There are more to be sure. However, the number 13 has a mere 26. Let's look at the word Chodesh and its primitive root Kadesh from the Strongs. Chodesh, H 2320. 1. The new moon, month, monthly, from Kadesh, H 2318, the new moon, by implication, a month. The phrase, by implication a month, will prove to be crucial when we compare the two nouns, Yiriach and Chodesh, later in the calendar studies. Kadesh, 1. To be new, renew, repair, to make anew, to repair. Bingo. Here is the same repeatable ordinance that we saw in the primitive root for the word Shana, H 8141. In the Hebrew pictograph, and also looking at the surrounding words, Chodesh becomes more distinct from the noun used for moon Yiriach. Let's take a look and break it down letter by letter. Chodesh. Chet. The ancient pictograph is a picture of a tent wall. The meaning of this letter are outside, as the function of the wall is to protect the occupants from the elements, as the wall in the middle of the tent divides the tent into the male and female sections, and secular as something that is outside. Dalet. The basic meaning of the letter Dalet is door, but it has several other meanings associated with it. It can mean a back and forth movement, as one goes back and forth through the tent, through the door. It can mean dangle, as the tent door dangled down from the roof pole of the tent. It can also mean weak or poor, as one who dangles the head down. Shin. The ancient pictograph for this letter is a picture of 2 front teeth. This letter has the meaning of teeth, sharp, and press, from the function of the teeth when chewing. It also has the meaning of 2, again, both, or second from the 2 teeth. Words related to H 2320. H 2314, to encompass, surround, enclose. 2315, chamber, room, parlor, innermost or inward part, within. 2316, honor, hadar. 2317, dwelling, hadrak. 2318, to be new, renew, repair, to renew oneself. 2319, new thing, fresh. And 2322, hadasha, new, a town in Judah. Before continuing, a look at the word chodesh, H6944, is warranted, since it only differs from chodesh, H2320, by the first letter. Chodesh, H6944, 1. Apartness, holiness, sacredness, separateness, of God, of places, of things. From Kadesh, H6942, to consecrate, sanctify, prepare, dedicate, be hallowed, be holy, be sanctified, be separate. Causatively make, pronounce, or observe as. A similar pattern is becoming evident within the word for month, chodesh. However, we still haven't seen much from any orb, such as the moon, stars, or the sun. What is emerging, from a counting context, is a repeatable, renewable count of 30 that appears to be set apart for observances and feasts. Without these chodeshim, or the months, we would have to count the individual days, all 360 of them. What the chodesh, the month, does is help us divide the year in segments, keeping the feasts in their seasons. Hebrew etymology makes the case for a stable, reliable count of 30. The King James Version uses this word chodesh as month 254 times. It only defines it as a new moon 20 times, and as monthly 1 time. And again, this is all by implication. Here's a sample list of the verses that use the word chodesh. That's a lot of verses using a misapplied and mistranslated word. It's easy to see how we lost so much through interlingual rendition, context, and culture throughout the millennium. No wonder there is such upheaval in the calendar debate today. If we allow Scripture to define our terms, it becomes clear that counting, rather than calculating, the year is more reliable. You lean on nothing else but the word of Yahweh. There is no waiting for a priest to call the end of the year. There is no waiting for the moon to start the beginning of the month. You don't need to rely on a sighting across the world. You aren't wondering when your fall feast will land on your work calendar 7 months in advance. Everything is laid out for you at the beginning of the year when the Tekufa is seen. Verses using Chodesh, H2320, for new moon. Here is a list of some verses that translate Chodesh, a 30-day repeatable count, as a new moon, by implication. By replacing the word for month, Chodesh, with new moon, has led many generations astray as to the original count from creation, missing many of the Creator's feast days. After a study of these verses, the words in Jeremiah are beginning to have more context. Jeremiah 8:8-9. How do ye say, we are wise, and the law of the Lord is with us? Lo, certainly in vain made he it. The pen of the scribes is in vain. Wise men are ashamed, they are dismayed and taken. Lo, they have rejected the word of the Lord. And what wisdom is in them? The month, Yeriach. It's time to look at the other word for month, Yeriach, H3394, and its origin, Yerach, H3391. Both are nouns dealing with the moon and the action it takes, the lunation cycle. H3394, Yeriach, moon. This is the masculine noun for the orb we see in our night and sometimes day sky. H3391, Yerach, month, lunar cycle, moon, calendar month. This is a masculine noun describing the cycle of the moon's phases over a 27.3 to 29.5 day period in today's sky. This word, H3391, Yerach, is used twice in Torah, Exodus 2:2 and Deuteronomy 21:13. Both verses are in the context of using the phases of the moon to count out the time for hiding or mourning for a captive. Neither are used in the context of counting any of the 12 30-day segments beginning at the Tekufa. Before moving on, let's look at Orach, H734, and Zerach, H732. Both share the Resh and the Chet with Yeriach. Their definitions speak of a way, path, road, passing of life, traveler, wayfarer, to wander, journey, to keep company with. Sounds a lot like a moon's locality and its wandering path through the sky. In these words, we don't see the pattern of repetition and renewing. However, they do describe the moon's ordinances in the night and day sky. Even Josephus' description of the fourth day of creation makes no reference to Yahweh's feast or their countdowns, but places the orbs in their motions and courses. From the works of Josephus, Book 1, Chapter 1, 31b. Quote, "On the fourth day he adorned the heaven with the sun, the moon, and the other stars, and appointed them their motions and courses, that the vicissitudes of the seasons might be clearly signified." Are we truly looking at the same month that was commanded from the first day of creation? How does that work when the orbs in the firmament were created until the fourth day? Could the lunation cycle of the moon, or the month, be different from what Yahweh created for his account, for his set-apart holy feasts? What do we find in Torah when we look for this word for moon? Yeriach, H. 3394. Well, the first time it's used is in Joseph's dream, in the context of prophecy, not counting days. The next two times we find Yeriach, moon, in Torah is in Deuteronomy with dire warnings. Interestingly, neither of these Torah verses are mentioned within the 613 mitzvot. The last time we read the word Yeriach, moon, in Torah is Deuteronomy 33:14, where here he is talking about the precious things, agricultural produce, that is put forth by the sun and the moon. Deuteronomy 33:14. "And for the precious fruits brought forth by the sun, and for the precious things put forth by the moon." Yeriach. As you see with those three verses, there is not a count of any kind spoken about, and there is certainly no mention of any holy convocation or feast days. In the whole of Torah, there is no command for the moon to start the 30-day count of Yahweh's chodeshem. In fact, the moon wasn't present for the first 3 days of creation to count. So what the heck is going on with all these calendars that are so dependent on the moon's counting abilities? Maybe what we really have is tradition and syncretism of worship, like in the days of the kings and patriarchs. Moon and new moon, verses in the Tanakh, Yerach and Yeriach. The verses are using Yeriach to denote the masculine noun that describes one of the celestial orbs in the sky. There is no mention of any of the holy days outlined in Leviticus 23. There is also no mention of a 30-day count. The verses also fail to mention a 13th lunation cycle that is required every 3 years to keep the seasons in check when using a lunar year. These verses also contain 2 other words related to the moon, which we will soon take a closer look. Now let's look at the verses that render H23:20, Chodesh, as new moon. From the list, you can see this word has been misused throughout the scriptures. Think of the implication this mistranslation has had throughout time. What happens when we reinstate the 30-day count for new moon? The context will open up and reveal the true count of days and years, not months or moon cycles. The 2 other words that come up in conjunction with Yeriach is Laban, H. 3842, and Serahan, H. 772. Lebanah is found in Song of Songs 6:10 and Isaiah 24:23. In this instance, Lebanah has the meaning of becoming white. Remember Rebekah's brother Laban? Not the greatest guy. Serahan is rendered as a round pendant for the neck, round like the moon. It is found in Judges 8:21 and 26. It's also found in Isaiah 3:18. Abraham's father, Terah, H. 8646, and Yeriach, H. 3394, share the Resh and the Chet with the moon, and give no clues as to the counting of days. However, they definitely have pagan worship connections. So what is the true nature of the moon, and what job or ordinance was it given at the time of creation? Also, how does it fit into the chodeshem, monthly count, of Yahweh, and how is it really used in Scripture? Jeremiah gives us clues as to what the moon is doing in nature. It's moving tides, becomes the start time for fowl migration, brings forth the precious things, namely crops. The moon's lunation cycle is an agricultural tool used by farmers today to let them know when to seed certain crops, when to breed animals, and even when to dig post holes, all because of the moon's effect on water. The lunation cycle of the moon is where the word month originates from in the Proto-Germanic Saxon language, one that arrived thousands of years after the Torah was given. Because of its original 30-day phases, they were close to Yahweh's 30-day count, so it wasn't long before the two became interchangeable, and the moon's lunation cycle became the count to Yahweh's appointed times. The lunation cycle of the moon, or the month, started on the 4th day of creation after the first day-month-year count had already started. It originally did have a visible 30-day cycle, from full moon to full moon. However, if using the moon as a start of your chodesh, or your month count, you essentially are ignoring the first 3 days of creation. In Scripture, you sometimes see the lunar phases as a counting tool for a 30-day period of mourning. Other times you see it used in dreams and prophecy. Not once do you see it count out Yahweh's Kodesh for his festivals. Today, there are 2 lunation cycles. The first is the sidereal cycle that amounts to 27.3 days relative to the stars. The second is the synodic cycle, which is a 29.5 day relative to the sun. Notice the second one has sin in it. Both require a 13th month every 3 years, so the start of the year doesn't happen after the spring harvest when all the green things are shooting up, and then you end up showing up for Sukkot in the winter. In fact, the verses in 2 Chronicles and Revelation both are explicit about there being only 12 months. Here are some other verses relative to 12s. 12 gates, Revelation 21:12. 12 foundation stones, names, and apostles in Revelation 21:14. 12 bronze bowls, Jeremiah 52:20. 12 brothers, Genesis 42:32. 12 cakes, Leviticus 24:5. 12 kinds of fruit for every month, Revelation 22:2. 12 gold pans, 120 shekels, which is 12 times 10, Numbers 7:86. 12 months later, Daniel 4:29. 12 princes from Ishmael, Genesis 17:20. 12 pillars for each tribe of Israel, Genesis 17:20. 12 silver dishes, silver bowls, and gold pans, Numbers 7:84. 12 spring from Elim, Numbers 33:9. 12 cubits, 1 Kings 7:15. 12 deputies for each month, Chodesh, in the year, 1 Kings 4:7. 12 lions, 1 Kings 10:20. 12 pieces of a new cloak, 1 Kings 11:30. Notice that 2 of these verses, 1 Kings 4:7 and Revelation 22:2, denote a 12th month, Chodesh year. No mention, or even inference, of a 13th month is ever found in Scripture. It appears 1 Kings is written before 700 BC, when the original 360-day count was still in use and operational. Revelation is a future prophecy, written about the restoration of the kingdom of heaven. In the case of the latter, is this a clue for a future restoration of time? It seems the evidence is mounting in the affirmative for this theory. In Genesis, the moon is completely mistaken for the lesser light to rule the night, but upon closer inspection of Genesis 1:16, Yeriach is never mentioned, neither is month. The moon also reflects light from the sun and therefore doesn't possess its own light. There are also grammatical implications that show the moon cannot possess light, as the word or, light, is feminine and the moon is masculine. But the sun, which has feminine and masculine gender, does possess light and reflects that light on the moon. Isaiah 13:10 shows that the light comes from a feminine noun. Isaiah 13:10, "For the stars of heaven and the constellations thereof shall not give their light. The sun shall be darkened in his going forth, and the moon shall not cause her light to shine." The next problem that the moon has with being the lesser light to rule the night is that it does not stay in the night sky faithfully. It's often seen in the daytime, and the only time during its lunation cycle it's in the entire night season is around the full moon phase. The moon's ordinances are for agricultural cues, signals for migration of birds, and to bring tides in and out. The moon was never commanded to start the count of any chodeshem of Yahovah's. Jeremiah gives us clues as to which celestial orbs has the greater light's job and the lesser light's job for the covenants of the day and night. Jeremiah is telling us that there are ordinances of the moon but the stars are for a light by night. These are the ordinances of nature that we witness the moon's influence on. Many will use the one verse in Psalms 104 to try and connect the moon with the Creator's feast. However, there is not one holy convocation, feast day, or other Shabbat mentioned in the whole chapter. This will prove to be another example where two words, through time, culture, context, and implication, become mutually exclusive, when in fact context is most important to understand the text. Remember how it was discussed earlier that month, the moon's lunation cycle, and month, the 30-day count segment of the year, have become mutually exclusive by implication. The same has occurred with the word moed, or seasons, and the Creator's festival days. Let's take a closer look at the definition for moed, H. 4150, and unravel the mix-up between nature's seasons and ordinances, and the Creator's appointed holy days. H. 4151, moed, speaks first of placement, which makes perfect sense in the context of Genesis 1:14. He is placing the celestial orbs in the sky. We see that the second meaning is dealing with time. The primitive root H. 3259, yad, seems not only in the sense of placement and time, but also signal or sign. Moed is a rich word with many different meanings throughout the scripture. It's imperative to keep verses in context of the chapter and not cherry pick and isolate for our own purposes. That's how we got in the confusion in the first place. Much like the words for month and moon, chodesh and yeriach, not all seasons are appointed feast days, and the two are not mutually exclusive. In Scripture, not all feasts are called by Yahweh, but by the people. Sound familiar? Just do a quick search for the word H. 4150, moed. It occurs in the King James Version 223 times. However, not all of those are speaking of feasts. You will know when the holy feasts are being referenced because there will be a qualifier announcing what feast is being talked about, i.e. Passover, trumpets, Shabbat. Remember, we have already discussed how there is a difference between Yahweh's feast and man's in Scripture. Could the problem stem from the misapplication of the word new moon or chodesh? The clue is given by Strong himself when he admits that month and month, yeriach and chodesh, are linked by implication. Sin was the problem from the beginning, if you remember the Garden of Eden story with the tree of knowledge. Again and again, the children of Yahweh were warned about following gods their fathers knew not, and yet they continued. Yahweh even set about to change the patterns of the solar and lunar count to further separate his children from the worship of those bodies, with the Hezekiah sundial steps miracle. There are 887 warnings in the Old Testament referring to pagan worship. 60% warns against moon worship, Astaroth, and 40% referenced sun worship, Baal. Yet, here we are thousands of years later, looking to the moon to start our days, months, and years. The count that was given from the first day required no sun or moon or stars to commence. The count went on for 3 days without any of these celestial bodies existing, yet the moon and the sun are still major players in every pagan calendar in use today. In summary, allowing Yahweh's word to define calendar terms gives a different context for the two words that are used interchangeably for a month, the lunation cycle of the moon consisting of 27.3 to 29.5 days, and month, the 30-day count for Yahweh's chodeshem. We see the moon does not live up to the 30-day count, nor was it there in the beginning of the first day of the first year in creation. A year with 13 months is required with the lunar calendar, but is never spoken of in Scripture. However, we see plenty of 12s throughout. The moon was never appointed the ordinance or job to count Yahweh's chodeshem, or his months, to his festivals. Rather, it was given the job of agricultural and prophetic meanings. It does have a count, and at one time was a full 30 days, but that changed with the shadow of Hezekiah's sundial steps. This count was used for days of mourning or hiding, but never as a count to any holy days. So, what does this mean to a calendar seeker? It means you have another key to what a counterfeit count or calendar looks like. Any calendar that uses any portion of the lunation cycle of the moon, or the month, is allowing that celestial orb to dictate when Yahweh's feast will commence.